The bank manager called me ma'am 4 times before he finally said it. Our joint savings account, the one with $387,000 in it, had been drained to $11.42 over a period of 6 weeks, and every single transfer had been authorized with my husband's thumbprint. I was standing in the lobby of a Chase branch on South Colorado Boulevard in Denver, holding a vanilla latte that was going cold, and the bank manager, this kid who looked maybe 25, kept apologizing like he'd personally stolen the money. He hadn't, but the man I'd shared a bed with for 9 years had. That was a Tuesday. By Friday, I owned everything. But this story doesn't start in a bank. It starts in a server room in 2014 with a girl who thought backing up data was the closest thing to prayer. My name is Ren Castellucci. I'm 34. I'm a cybersecurity analyst for a mid-size healthcare company in Denver, which is a fancy way of saying I get paid to be paranoid. I monitor networks, track anomalies, investigate breaches, and, this part matters, I am professionally trained to notice when someone is hiding something digital. If a single file moves through a system it shouldn't, I see it. If someone deletes a text message, I know it still lives somewhere. That's not a personality quirk. That's what pays my mortgage, or what used to pay my mortgage before my husband tried to sell the house out from under me. Growing up, I was the middle kid in a family of 5 in Pueblo, Colorado. My older brother Nico got the ambition, my younger sister Raina got the charm, and I got the anxiety, which honestly turned out to be more useful than either of those things. Anxiety made me check things twice, then 3 times. Then I just started keeping copies of everything because checking wasn't enough. My mother worked 2 jobs, front desk at a Holiday Inn and weekends at a laundromat on Santa Fe. My father drove long-haul trucks and was home maybe 9 days a month if the weather cooperated. We weren't struggling exactly, but I remember my mom weighing bananas at the grocery store and putting one back if the bunch was over $1.20. That kind of math stays in your bones. The person who raised me more than anyone was my grandmother, Abuelita Paz. She lived 3 blocks from us in a yellow house with a screen door that never closed right. She made the best green chili tamales in Pueblo County, and I will take that opinion to my grave. Every Saturday, I'd sit at her kitchen table doing homework while she cooked, and she had this saying she repeated so often it was practically her ringtone. She'd look at me over her bifocals and say, "Mija, always copy the recipe before someone changes the ingredients." As a kid, I thought she was talking about actual recipes. She kept a handwritten cookbook that was more duct tape than paper at that point, but she wasn't talking about food. She was talking about records, evidence, the version of truth that exists before someone has a chance to edit it. I kept that habit my entire life. I backed up everything, emails, texts, photos, documents, all of it mirrored to encrypted cloud storage that refreshed every 72 hours. Not because I was suspicious of anyone, because Abuelita Paz told me to copy the recipe, and I listened. One more thing about me before we get to the part where my life detonated. I always wanted to open a small cybersecurity consulting firm for women-owned businesses. I had a business plan saved in a folder on my desktop labeled Someday. I'd been adding to it since 2019, client templates, pricing models, even a logo I designed during a boring Zoom call. That dream sat there, patient, while I poured every spare dollar into a marriage that was quietly rotting from the inside. Now let me tell you about Garrison. Garrison Kale, 6'2", broad shoulders, this booming laugh that filled whatever room he walked into. He sold commercial insurance and he was exceptional at it. The kind of guy who could make a conversation about liability coverage feel like you were sharing a beer with your best friend. When I met him at a networking mixer in Lodo in the spring of 2015, he was wearing a navy blazer with no tie, and he brought me a gin and tonic without asking what I was drinking. He just guessed right. That felt like something at the time. Our first real date was at this tiny ramen place on Larimer Street called Bones. I ordered the spicy miso, he got the tonkotsu, and we split a plate of pork gyoza that I still think about sometimes. He told me about losing his dad to pancreatic cancer when he was 19. He cried a little, not performatively, just a quick swipe across his eyes with the back of his hand. I remember thinking, this man is not afraid to feel things, which was ironic considering what came later. There was one moment from that night I should have paid more attention to. When the check came, he grabbed it fast, almost too fast, and when I offered to split, he said, "I never let anyone see the numbers. Old habit." He laughed. I laughed. But that phrase, "I never let anyone see the numbers," that was the first red flag, and I folded it up and put it in a drawer in my brain where it stayed for almost a decade. We dated for 14 months. He proposed at Red Rocks during a Bon Iver concert with a ring he'd had custom made, a sapphire flanked by 2 small diamonds, $8,200, which I only know because I found the receipt 7 years later in a box he thought I'd never open. The wedding was small, 62 guests, at a converted barn in Golden. My mother cried. His mother, Deirdre, did not. She shook my hand at the reception like I was interviewing for a position she hadn't approved. That should have been red flag number 2. For the first 5 years, it was good. Should have been not perfect. He traveled a lot for work, and he had this habit of going quiet for hours when he was stressed, like someone had unplugged him. But we cooked together on Sundays. We hiked Lookout Mountain in October when the aspens turned. He left notes on the bathroom mirror in dry erase marker. "You're my favorite human." We tried for kids and couldn't, and that grief sat between us like furniture we kept rearranging but never removed. The cracks started in 2021, small ones. His phone, which had always been face up on the kitchen counter, started living face down. Then it started leaving the room when he did. He changed his laptop password, not unusual on its own, except he'd used the same one since we got married, our wedding date backward. When I asked about the new password, he said his company required a security update. I work in cybersecurity. I knew that was a lie. But I told myself it was a small lie, and small lies are just privacy, right? Then the late nights, 2, maybe 3 a week. He'd text at 8 p.m., client dinner running long. Garrison had never had client dinners that ran past 9. Suddenly they were ending at 11, midnight, once at 1:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I was lying in bed watching the clock on the ceiling from the projector alarm he'd bought me for Christmas, and I remember thinking the red numbers looked like they were bleeding. And that was just the beginning. The first thing that really cut was small enough that most people would dismiss it. We were at a barbecue at his coworker Landon's house in Highlands Ranch, July 2022, standing around the grill with maybe 15 people. Someone asked me about a data breach that had been in the news, the big hospital chain hack, and I started explaining how the attackers likely got in through a phishing vector. I was maybe 4 sentences in when Garrison put his hand on my shoulder and said, loud enough for the whole patio to hear, "Babe, nobody wants a lecture." "You're not at work." Everyone laughed. Landon's wife Tiff gave me the sympathetic smile that somehow made it worse, and Garrison squeezed my shoulder like he was being affectionate, but the pressure was a message. Shut up. I ate a hot dog and didn't say another word for an hour. The money came next. We'd always had a joint checking and a joint savings. My salary was $114,000. His was $142,000, or so he told me. I'd never actually seen his pay stubs because, remember, I never let anyone see the numbers. In August 2022, he suggested we simplify our finances. He wanted to handle all the bills. He said I worked too hard and shouldn't have to worry about it. He said it like it was a gift. It was a cage. I agreed, and for 6 months I didn't look at a single bank statement. The cybersecurity analyst who backed up everything and trusted nothing just stopped looking. Because looking would mean admitting something was wrong, and admitting something was wrong would mean my marriage was failing, and my marriage failing would mean I was alone, and being alone at 32 in a house full of furniture we'd picked out together felt like drowning in a room with no water. So I didn't look. Then came the replacement. November 2022. I found a hair tie on the passenger seat of Garrison's Audi Q5, one of those spiral plastic ones, clear with gold flecks. I don't own spiral hair ties. I use plain black elastics from a 30-pack at Target. I held that little coil of plastic in my palm and felt something shift behind my sternum. Not a break, not yet, more like a lock being tested. I put it in the center console and didn't say a word. 2 weeks later, his credit card statement, one he'd left on the printer, the first financial document I'd seen in months, showed a charge for $340 at a restaurant called Beckett's Table in Scottsdale, Arizona. Garrison hadn't mentioned any trips to Arizona. When I asked, he said it was a client dinner. I said, $340 for a client dinner? He said, it's Scottsdale, Ren. Everything's expensive there. Then he said the thing he always said when I questioned him, you're spiraling again. That phrase, you're spiraling again. He'd started using it around month 4 of the late nights, and it became his all-purpose silencer. If I asked about a receipt, spiraling. If I mentioned he'd been distant, spiraling. If I said I missed him, spiraling. He turned my concern into a diagnosis, and the worst part was that sometimes I believed him. The public humiliation came in December. Garrison's company holiday party at the Four Seasons in downtown Denver. I wore a dark green dress I'd bought specifically for the event, $220 from Nordstrom, which felt like a lot, but I wanted to feel like myself again. We walked in together, and for the first 20 minutes it felt almost normal. He had his hand on my back. He introduced me to a new VP. He got me a glass of Prosecco. Then a woman walked over, tall, auburn hair past her shoulders, white dress that fit like it had been sewn onto her body. She extended her hand to me and said, "You must be Ren. Garrison talks about you constantly." Her name was Odette Moreau, and she was, according to Garrison, a new regional coordinator his firm had hired. Something about the way she said constantly, the slight curve of her mouth, the half second too long she held my hand, made my stomach fold. Garrison jumped in immediately. "Odette's been a rock star this quarter. Closed the Brennan account by herself." Odette smiled. "He exaggerates." They had a rhythm, a practiced, comfortable rhythm, the kind you don't develop in a conference room. I excused myself to the bathroom and stood at the sink for 4 minutes staring at my own face, and this thought crystallized with absolute clarity. I am standing in a hotel bathroom at a party where my husband just introduced me to the woman he's sleeping with, and she is wearing white like it's her wedding reception. That thought was so absurd that I actually laughed, out loud, alone. A woman at the next sink gave me a look, and I said, "The shrimp was funny." She left quickly. I went back out. I finished my Prosecco. I ate 2 crab cakes and a miniature beef Wellington. I smiled at everyone, and I watched. Garrison touched Odette's elbow 3 times in the next hour. She leaned into him when she laughed. At one point, he whispered something in her ear, and she covered her mouth, and Garrison's boss clapped him on the back and said, "You two make a hell of a team." Nobody said that to me. I was furniture. On the drive home, I said, "She seems close with you." Garrison didn't take his eyes off the road. "Don't start, Ren." I said, "I'm not starting anything. I'm making an observation." He said, "You're spiraling again. Can we just have one night where you don't ruin it?" I didn't ruin it, but I did start keeping a log. January 2023, the Ally attack. Garrison's mother Deirdre came to visit for a long weekend, and on the second night, while Garrison was supposedly at the gym, she sat across from me at the kitchen island while I made chicken piccata and delivered what I can only describe as a prepared statement. "Ren, I'm going to be honest with you because no one else will. Garrison is unhappy. He's been unhappy for a while. And I think part of that is because you've become very focused on your career and not very focused on being a wife. I was squeezing a lemon. I squeezed it so hard a seed shot across the counter. Being a wife, I repeated. You know what I mean? The house is never as clean as it could be. You work until 7 most nights. And Garrison told me you've been, well, paranoid, checking his phone, questioning his schedule. That's not healthy, Wren. Garrison told you I check his phone. He's worried about you. The lemon was empty. I put it down. Deirdre, I have never once checked his phone. Not once. She gave me this look, pitying and certain, and said, Sweetheart, that's what Garrison said you'd say. There it was. He'd preceded his own mother with a version of me that didn't exist so that when the truth came out, I'd already be the crazy wife. That was architecture. That was planning. And it was so well executed that I actually felt a flicker of something close to admiration before the fury hit. February 2023, the spatial violation. I came home from work on a Thursday to find that Garrison had converted our spare bedroom, the room I used as my home office, into a guest room. My desk was in the garage. My monitors were stacked against the wall. My filing cabinet was in the basement. He said we needed the space because people might visit. When I asked who, he said, You don't need to know every detail of my social calendar, Wren. That's the spiraling I'm talking about. My work laptop was still in the room. He hadn't moved it. It was sitting on the new guest bed like an afterthought. But my personal laptop, the one with the someday folder, the business plan, years of personal files, was nowhere. I found it 2 days later in a box in the garage with water damage from a leak he hadn't bothered to mention. The hard drive was destroyed, or he thought it was, because everything on that laptop had been backed up to encrypted cloud storage every 72 hours automatically, because Abuelita Paz told me to copy the recipe before someone changes the ingredients. Thank you, Abuelita. March 2023, the institutional threat. Garrison sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where Deirdre had delivered her monologue, and told me he wanted a divorce. He said it calmly. Rehearsed. He said he'd already talked to a lawyer, a guy named Pruitt at some firm in Cherry Creek, and that Pruitt had advised him that given my erratic behavior, his words, he was likely to get a favorable settlement. He said Pruitt suggested I might want to cooperate rather than make this ugly. What erratic behavior? I asked. The paranoia, Wren, the accusations, the spiraling. Pruitt says a judge will see the pattern. What pattern? I've been documenting it. He pulled out his phone and showed me a note, dated entries going back months. January 14th, Wren accused me of cheating with no evidence. February 2nd, Wren became hysterical when I rearranged the guest room. February 18th, Wren threw a glass. I had never thrown a glass. Not once. Not ever. He was building a fiction, a paper trail of a person who didn't exist. Garrison, I said, I have never thrown a glass. He put his phone away. That's what you'd say. The cruelest moment came the following week. I was at the grocery store, King Soopers on Hampton, buying chicken thighs and jasmine rice because some part of me was still cooking dinners for a man who was actively fabricating my mental breakdown. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. It read, Hi, Wren. This is Odette. I just wanted you to know that Garrison and I are in love and have been for over a year. I'm not trying to hurt you, but I think you deserve the truth. He's planning to move me into the house once you're out. I hope you find peace. I stood in the rice aisle holding a bag of Mahatma jasmine rice and read that text 3 times. She was going to move into my house, the house I'd put $120,000 of my own money into as a down payment, the house where I'd painted the bathroom seafoam green myself, where I'd planted tomatoes every April, where I'd sat on the back porch and mapped out my business plan on a yellow legal pad. that house. And she sent me that text from the produce section of her conscience like she was doing me a favor. I put the rice in my cart. I bought the chicken thighs. I drove home. I made dinner. Garrison ate it without comment, and after he fell asleep that night, something inside me went very, very quiet. Not broken, not explosive, just resolved, like a circuit completing. I reached for my phone, opened my encrypted backup app, and started reviewing every file I had. What nobody knew, not Garrison, not Deirdre, not Odette, not Pruitt, was that I had been quietly collecting data for 4 months before Garrison ever mentioned divorce. Not because I'd planned revenge, because I'm a cybersecurity analyst, and when anomalies appear in a system, I investigate. It's reflex. It started in November 2022, the night I found the gold-flecked hair tie. That same evening, after Garrison fell asleep, I ran a passive scan on our home network, something I could do in 9 minutes with tools I already had on my work laptop. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was looking for anomalies. I found 6. Garrison had connected a second phone to our home Wi-Fi on September 3rd, 2022. A device I'd never seen. It connected nightly between 10 p.m. and midnight, always when he was in the bathroom or watching the game downstairs. I logged the MAC address. I tracked connection patterns over the next 3 months. The second phone was consistent, a ghost device living in our house like a second marriage. By December, I'd accessed our financial accounts, the ones he'd told me not to worry about. The joint savings that should have held $387,000 from years of combined income had been hemorrhaging. Transfers to an account I didn't recognize, always in amounts just under $10,000, $9,800 here, $9,700 there, 16 transfers over 5 months, classic structuring. He was keeping each one below the federal reporting threshold, which meant he knew exactly what he was doing. The receiving account was at a credit union in Scottsdale, Arizona, where Beckett's table was, where the $340 dinner had been. Remember when I mentioned my personal laptop got water damaged and he thought the hard drive was destroyed? That laptop had our shared password manager synced to it. Even with the hardware dead, every password Garrison had ever saved was in my encrypted cloud backup. Every single one. His email, his bank login, his second phone's iCloud account, which he'd helpfully saved the password for because he was arrogant enough to think I'd never look. I looked. The second phone's iCloud backup contained 14 months of text messages with Odette Moreau, photos, voice memos, and, this is where I almost dropped my coffee, a scanned document, a listing agreement with a real estate agent named Kirk Pratchett at Compass Denver, dated January 15, 2023, for the sale of our house, listed at $785,000. My name was nowhere on the agreement. Garrison had forged a quitclaim deed, a document that would transfer my ownership interest to him alone, and submitted it to the county clerk's office. It hadn't been processed yet. It was sitting in a queue. He was trying to sell our house without my knowledge or consent and move Odette in, or cash out and disappear. Either way, I would have been left with nothing. No home, no savings, no evidence, no recourse. But I had every receipt, every transfer record, every text message, every forged document, every lie, time-stamped and backed up to a server he didn't know existed. I called my cousin Emiliano, who's a family law attorney in Colorado Springs. I'd never needed a family law attorney before. I was hoping I never would again. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Wren, this isn't just a divorce case. This is fraud, maybe forgery, possibly federal structuring violations. You need a litigator, and you need one today." He referred me to a woman named Tegan Osei at a firm in downtown Denver. Tegan had the demeanor of someone who'd seen everything and was mildly irritated by all of it. She reviewed my evidence over 2 days. On the third day, she called me and said, "Your husband is either very stupid or very arrogant. Probably both. We're going to enjoy this." We moved fast. Tegan filed an emergency motion to freeze all joint assets and block the sale of the house. She flagged the forged quitclaim deed for the county clerk and notified the title company that the listing was fraudulent. She subpoenaed Garrison's financial records, the real ones, not the versions he'd shown me, and she connected me with a forensic accountant named Dr. Hale Yun, who spent 1 weekend with my data and came back with a 40-page report documenting $156,000 in diverted funds, the Scottsdale Credit Union account, which was in Odette's name, and a $34,000 deposit on a condo in Cherry Creek that Garrison had put down using money from our joint savings. He'd used our marriage to fund his next life. Every dollar I'd earned, every dollar I'd saved, every Sunday I'd spent meal prepping chicken and rice instead of going out so we could build our savings, all of it had been siphoned into a future that didn't include me. Tegan also obtained a copy of the documentation Garrison had been keeping about my supposed erratic behavior, the fake journal entries about thrown glasses and paranoid episodes. She compared the dates against my work badge-in records and security camera footage from our Ring doorbell. On 4 of the dates Garrison claimed I'd had episodes, I was verifiably at work until after 7 p.m. On one of the dates, I was in Seattle at a cybersecurity conference with 400 witnesses and a conference lanyard to prove it. His paper trail was fiction. Mine was forensic. The divorce hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday in late April 2023. Denver District Court, Courtroom 4, B, 9 a.m. The weather was absurdly beautiful. 68 degrees, not a cloud. The kind of Colorado spring morning that makes you want to sit on a patio with a cortado and forget you're about to burn your husband's life to the ground. Garrison arrived with Pruitt, his Cherry Creek lawyer, looking like they were walking into a country club lunch. Gray suit, no tie. He'd gotten a haircut. He looked relaxed, confident. He had no idea what was coming, and the fact that he had no idea was, I'll be honest, one of the more satisfying sensations I've ever experienced, better than the crab cakes at the Four Seasons, better than the first ramen at Bones. Garrison and Pruitt sat down, and Pruitt opened with a motion for expedited divorce proceedings based on irreconcilable differences and Garrison's documented concerns about my mental stability. He actually used the word stability. Pruitt slid a folder across the table, the fake journal entries, a statement from Deirdre attesting to my paranoid behavior, and a letter from some therapist I'd never met claiming Garrison had consulted her about his concerns for my well-being. The judge, the Honorable Marisol Renfro, reviewed the folder with an expression that can only be described as professional blankness. Then she looked at Tegan. Tegan stood up. She didn't rush. She placed 4 folders on the table, each one tabbed and color-coded, because Tegan Osei is the kind of woman who color-codes destruction. "Your Honor," she said, "my client would like to present evidence of financial fraud, forgery, asset concealment, and a systematic campaign of deception by the respondent." Garrison's smile didn't drop. Not yet. He leaned over to Pruitt and whispered something. Pruitt nodded. They still thought this was manageable. Tegan opened the first folder. The bank records. 16 structured transfers totaling $156,000, each deliberately kept under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. Each receiving account, Odette Moreau, Scottsdale Credit Union. She laid each transfer out chronologically, like a timeline of theft. Garrison's jaw tightened, just slightly. Pruitt stopped writing. Second folder. The forged quitclaim deed. Tegan produced the original document, a certified copy from the county clerk's office, and a handwriting analysis from a forensic document examiner confirming that my signature had been forged. She also produced the listing agreement with Kirk Pratchett at Compass, showing our home listed for sale without my knowledge, consent, or legal authorization. Garrison leaned forward. I can explain that. Mr. Kale, Judge Renfro said, you'll have your opportunity. Third folder, the text messages. 14 months of communication between Garrison and Odette, recovered from the iCloud backup of his second phone. Tegan read 3 excerpts aloud. The first was Garrison telling Odette, "Once Ren's out, we'll renovate the kitchen. She always had terrible taste." The second was Odette replying, "Can't wait to sleep in a bed that doesn't smell like her sad little life." The third was Garrison, dated February 2023. "Pruitt says if we play the mental health angle, she won't get a dime. She's so easy to gaslight, it's almost boring." That one landed in the courtroom like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Pruitt closed his folder. Garrison's face went white, not gradually but all at once, like someone had pulled a plug. He opened his mouth and nothing came out. Fourth folder, the dismantling of his fake evidence. Tegan produced my work badge records, the Ring doorbell footage, and the Seattle conference registration, all corresponding to dates Garrison had claimed I'd had episodes. She produced the therapist's letter and noted that the therapist, a Dr. Caraway, had no record of Garrison as a patient and had filed a complaint with her licensing board after being contacted about the fraudulent letter bearing her name. "Your Honor," Tegan said, "the respondent fabricated a mental health narrative to discredit my client while simultaneously looting their shared assets and attempting to illegally transfer property ownership. This is not a divorce dispute. This is a coordinated fraud." Judge Renfro looked at Garrison for a long time. Then she looked at Pruitt, who had physically shifted his chair about 6 inches away from his client. "Mr. Kale," the judge said, "I am granting an emergency asset freeze on all accounts in your name, joint or individual. I am referring the quitclaim deed forgery to the district attorney's office, and I am awarding temporary exclusive possession of the marital home to Mrs. Castellucci effective immediately." Garrison stood up. "This is insane. She hacked my phone. This is illegally obtained." Tegan didn't even turn around. "Your Honor, all evidence was obtained from shared household network devices and cloud accounts accessible through mutually stored credentials on a shared password manager. Nothing was hacked. Nothing was illegal. Mr. Kale simply assumed his wife wasn't paying attention." Judge Renfro nodded. "Sit down, Mr. Kale." He sat. I looked at him across that table. This man who'd squeezed my shoulder at a barbecue, who'd called me spiraling, who'd told his mother I was paranoid, who'd told his mistress I was boring to gaslight, who'd tried to forge my name off my own house. I looked at him, and his eyes were wet, and his hands were flat on the table, like he was trying to keep the room from spinning. I picked up my bag. I pushed my chair in, and I said 5 words. "You should have checked the cloud." Then I walked out. The collapse was fast. Within 2 weeks, Garrison had been formally charged with forgery and fraud. The forged quitclaim deed alone carried a Class 5 felony in Colorado. The structuring of transfers, keeping them under $10,000 to avoid reporting, attracted federal attention. A forensic audit revealed an additional $34,000 in hidden expenditures, including the Cherry Creek condo deposit, jewelry purchases for Odette, and, this one still makes me laugh in a way that probably isn't healthy, a $2,200 couples massage retreat in Sedona that he attended with Odette while telling me he was at an insurance conference in Phoenix. Within a month, Pruitt withdrew as Garrison's attorney, apparently representing a client who forges documents and fabricates mental health records isn't great for a Cherry Creek practice. Garrison hired a cheaper lawyer, then a cheaper one. His third attorney was a guy who primarily handled DUI cases and looked perpetually startled. Deirdre called me once, 3 weeks after the hearing. She didn't apologize. She said, "I hope you're happy, Ren. You've destroyed my son." I said, "Deirdre, Your son forged my signature and stole $156,000. I didn't destroy him. I just turned the lights on. She hung up. We haven't spoken since. I heard from Nico that she had to sell her condo in Vale to help cover Garrison's legal fees. The emotional range of a parking meter, that woman, and yet somehow she found it in herself to feel sorry for the one person in this story who deserved none of it. Odette Moreau, the woman who texted me from the produce section of her conscience. The Scottsdale Credit Union account in her name became evidence in the fraud case. She was named as a co-conspirator in the asset concealment. Her employer, a regional marketing firm, terminated her after the legal filings became public. Last I heard, she'd moved back to Tucson and was selling cosmetics on Instagram. The condo deposit was seized. The kitchen she wanted to renovate stayed exactly the way I'd designed it. Garrison reached out one final time. A text in September 2023, 5 months after the hearing. It said, "Ren, I know I don't deserve to ask, but can we talk? I'm losing everything. I just want to understand how it went so wrong." I read it sitting on my back porch, in my house, drinking a glass of Malbec I'd bought myself. The tomatoes I'd planted in April were coming in thick and red. The evening light in Denver in September is this specific shade of gold that makes everything look like a painting someone hasn't finished yet. I typed back, "You know exactly how it went wrong. You just didn't think I'd find out." Then I blocked his number, not out of anger. The anger had burned off months ago, leaving something cleaner underneath. Clarity, maybe, or just the quiet satisfaction of a system restored to proper function. The divorce was finalized in November 2023. I kept the house. I received $212,000 in restitution. Not the full amount stolen, but enough. The judge's final order noted egregious financial misconduct and a deliberate pattern of deception, and awarded me 68% of remaining marital assets. Garrison's criminal case is still pending. The forgery charge alone could mean up to 3 years. But here's the part I want to end with. In January 2024, I opened that folder on my desktop, the one labeled Someday. The business plan was all there, preserved in the cloud backup Garrison never knew about. Every template, every pricing model, even the logo I'd sketched during that boring Zoom call. I updated the numbers, I filed the LLC paperwork, and in March 2024, I launched Castellucci Digital Security, a cybersecurity consulting firm for women-owned small businesses in Colorado. My first client was Tegan Osei's law firm. She said, "If you're half as thorough with my network as you were with your divorce, I'll sleep better at night." My second client was a bakery in Pueblo, owned by a woman named Mary Bell, who'd been hacked and lost $11,000 from her business account. She cried when I recovered the money. I cried too. That one felt personal. Abuelita Paz passed away in 2020 before any of this happened. She never got to see me use her advice to dismantle a man's entire fraudulent empire. But I think about her every single morning when I sit at my desk, in my office, in the spare bedroom that Garrison once tried to erase me from, and I hear her voice clear as a church bell. "Mija, always copy the recipe before someone changes the ingredients." I copied the recipe, abuelita, every last ingredient. Last week I made green chile tamales from her cookbook, the real one, held together with duct tape, which Reina shipped to me from Pueblo. I ate them on my back porch with a glass of cold horchata, and for the first time in years, the food tasted the way it was supposed to. Not like grief, not like survival, just like home.